right? Welcome everybody to 52 Living Ideas. We are going through Louis Sullivan's Kindergarten Chats, and this is part 6. So today we are going to start with, Rob, are you presenting today or it's going to be?
Yeah, I've got something to say.
Okay, wonderful. So it's going to be Sherri. We'll figure out the order. Just let me know what order you would like to go in. So it's going to be Sherri,
then probably Rob,
and then we're going to go to Rupali, after which we're going to have Joia and Maritza. So that's the plan. All right, so let's get started. Sherri.
Hi there, everyone. Good to see you all. My job usually here is to kind of keep ourselves our signposting going on and make sure we're all grounded historically as we're reading each of these chapters. And in this group, we've got another one of Sullivan's chapters on an office or on a building. In this particular time, it's a college library building. So I wanted to give you a little bit of background on that. I'm not going to go really too much into what Sullivan says about it in this chapter, because frankly, it's fairly short in this chapter. And if you read, there's a note at the bottom of at the end of that particular chapter that it was quite shortened when it was put in this publication. And it's been such a long time that I don't really remember reading it in the full extent so long ago, and none of you have access to that. But what he's getting at in this chapter is the same sort of thing he's talking about in the past, that these buildings are a reflection of the person who made them, and that they should be an original, fresh idea from that person, not cherry picking pieces from historical past. So we're going to do a quick little slideshow to show you where these where he's coming from in his description of the Columbian University Library. And then I wanted to take a little a sidestep there to kind of explain a little bit about libraries at universities in America, to just kind of give you the historical perspective. So do we have access to share, Shrikant?
Yes, you do.
Okay, Rob,
so
can you
share screen? Let's do, boom, hit that. And do keynote Sullivan 6.
Oh, you got to go to the first picture, not the last picture.
Oh,
don't everybody don't look. Don't look. Okay. All right. So here we have the Columbia University Library,
which is what he's referring to.
which is the building he was referring to. In the book, he is showing us a different image of it from, let me see, from from where we're standing here. It's over on the right hand side, and it's from a lower perspective, so we don't in his picture see so much of just below the dome. There's this half round window with a crisscrossing kind of pattern in where the window is. In the picture in Kindergarten Chats, we don't see that part of the building as well. That's why I chose this particular picture to show. So this was a building done by the famous New York architecture firm McKim, Mead and White. They were very, very strong classicists. And this was done in 1895. And to remind you all of the classicism butting heads with what was happening in Chicago, this was the headbutting that happened right at the World's Columbian Exhibition in Chicago, where in 1892, which was just a couple of years before this building was built, when they brought in a whole bunch of architects from New York, especially McKim, Mead and White, and they were called the Whites because all of their buildings were essentially very, very pale or light or white or even painted classical structures, which is kind of hilarious when you remember the more recent scholarship that shows that many of those buildings, like the Greek Parthenon, wasn't white marble, it was actually painted. But anyway, so we're starting here with Kim Mead and White's Columbia University Library building. And Jefferson, Sullivan is talking about how this is another example of picking pieces from the past. And so there are two very, very specific buildings that he is referring to in this one. And the first one is the Pantheon in Rome. It was meant as a temple, and you walk in through this pedimented front, massive doors, and inside it's a circular building with a domed roof and an open oculus window, a round open window at the very, very top of the dome. And I could wax poetically about the structure of it and about the concrete, but that's not where we're supposed to be talking today. So
you have to have something talking about concrete in this
but,
discussion.
But I don't think we should do it today.
Okay.
I really want to, but I'm trying to be good because it doesn't fit with this specific conversation. So anyway, this was one, as you can clearly see the similarity between the library at the Columbia University and this building. But there's also another building, and this is what's kind of interesting. This is the Baths of Diocletian, also in Rome. Notice this half round window up high with this vertical and horizontal mullions with little X's in each one of those. Well, that is the window, and I'm going to back up here. That is the window we see, almost a replica of it.
So this is a temple and a bath.
Yes, it's both a temple and a bath, which is funny because as much as I like to sit in the bath and read a book, usually I drop it in there in the tub at some point. So it's not really good for the books. But anyway, so what Sullivan is seeing is that McKim, Mead, and White very specifically took two incredibly famous buildings, mashed them together as one to make the library. But I wanted to get, did you get a UVA library? Like, did you get a map of the library?
No,
okay, so before we go on from here, because I don't want to.
Okay.
What I wanted to give you guys an example of is I wanted to talk about how university libraries kind of came into being and show you yet another, which looks quite historical. This one. Anybody know where this one is? Shrikant smiling. This is UVA's University of Virginia's library, or which it is called here the Rotunda, right in Charlottesville, less than 20 minutes from where we are right now. And it's part of what Thomas Jefferson called the Academical Village. This was built in 1819, so it was something that Sullivan knew about. And it too is meant to take a historical nod to the past, and specifically to the Rotunda from the Roman times. But there's a different thing going on in this particular case. What I wanted to, and should I leave this up?
Yeah, leave it up. Okay,
I was hoping to get a picture of the Academical Village, which we didn't get that yet. But UVA's campus is, if none of you are familiar with it, is a break from past campuses. University campuses really grow out of the tradition of monasteries, which of course always had the chapel or the cathedral or the church, whichever it was, at the center of the campus, and other buildings sort of radiated out from that. It was always the largest, the most dominant, the most impressive building on the campus. So it was really sort of the centerpiece.
I think that's true at like Yale and Harvard.
Yes, it is. And actually what happened with Jefferson is he very deliberately and very purposefully broke that tradition. And he did that with this library. So this is the head, if you can imagine, you're standing in a massive grassy area, and this massive building is the head of the campus, the biggest, most important building on the campus. And these little arcade walkways that you see on either side of the staircase, they stretch out left and right, and then coming on either side
Towards us,
towards
the viewer.
you, towards some distance behind us as the viewer, is a village, essentially. Houses, there's 5 on each side, or is there 6 on each side? I think it's 5 on each side, which are 2-story houses. That's where the professors stayed. And then in between are little dorm rooms, and they're called ranges, the little rooms. That's where all the students would stay. And the whole university was therefore not a village, like a residential village or a farm village or a village, little town kind of setting. This was an academical village, which was Thomas Jefferson's coinage. So what he was saying here is this is a village for learning. And the most important building on the campus was the library.
Not the church.
Not the church. In fact, he refused to build a church on the campus. Much later, and after Jefferson passed, the trustees decided that it needed to have a chapel. And then there was a big brouhaha over what style should the chapel be built in. And eventually, what they ended up doing is building a little chapel on the campus, which is, when you're standing here, it's kind of behind and off to the left of this rotunda, tucked in really. And it is much later than this building, but makes to look even older. It's like a little tiny medieval looking chapel.
Gargoyles and everything. No, it's literally, there are gargoyles on it.
But it was meant specifically for the trustees. They insisted that it not look as if it was part of Jefferson's original campus. So the fact that you have McKim, Mead, and White putting a rotunda on the campus, that's the library, is a nod both to the Roman historical past, but it's also a nod to Jefferson's idea that a library should be the very center of learning and the very center of a campus. So I wanted to make sure that you all had that kind of full historical perspective of what's going on architecturally before we get into more of what's happening with the text.
Yeah. I also wanted to make a note at the University of Chicago, which was built, which is where I went to school, which was built probably about the time Sullivan was writing all about this. We kind of decided to split the difference. So the main campus building is a library, but it's built to look like a medieval cathedral.
Okay, so we're going to try to stop share here, which we never seem to be able to do. Why?
My cursor disappears.
Your cursor disappears.
Yeah, so it doesn't let me stop the share.
If Shrikant can stop sharing.
I will do that.
There we go.
Nope.
No?
Hold on.
I think I just moved to the next slide, which is blank.
We're such problem children.
I managed to stop the share.
Okay, there we go.
Great.
All right, hi everybody. And then we're going to let Rob step into some of this discussion on democracy.
All right, so yeah, this is one of the. I think I don't think I spoke much of it. Hardly spoke, if at all, last time, because I didn't feel like I had a lot to. There's a lot of stuff that's in my wheelhouse. This time I feel like there's a lot of stuff that's in my wheelhouse because there's this whole section on democracy, and I think specifically the 2 chapters here of revulsion and democracy. So chapters 18 and 19. So in the first 2 chapters, our student is spends all this time railing against democracy. And then Sullivan comes back and makes his case for democracy as he defines it. And a lot of this is really interesting because it's part of a wider context of the time, roughly the turn of the 20th century, where there is a lot of sort of soul searching and worry going on about the nature of democracy. And the idea, specifically the idea is that the idea that democracy is just a great herd that it's the lowest common denominator. And actually that the term lowest common denominator, I think, came into vogue later, but there's an idea expressed in here that's very similar to that. Now, whereas he says democracy is just an average. Here we go. Yeah, this is the student complaining about democracy. He says democracy has nothing to do with genius. It has to do solely with the commonplace, the average, the lowest possible average at that. So the lowest possible average, the lowest common denominator, as we tend to say it today. And this is a widespread concern, and you can see this. What I find interesting about reading this through for the first time is knowing that Ayn Rand was reading this when she was doing her research for the Fountainhead, because all these ideas are popping up, right? So the idea in this, you have the young student straight out of architecture school, complaining that if this whole passage here towards the end of the chapter 18, is about how basically you want me to be a martyr. If I'm going to do architecture like you, I'm going to be this genius who's running against the current of the time. And the current of the time is they want us to, put out this imitative architecture to appeal to the lowest common denominator. This is what the masses want, but they're not willing, and that's what they're willing to pay for. And if I'm producing, architecture the way you want me to the mentor, I'm basically going to go broke, and I'm going to be, I don't want to be fined for being, I don't want to be fined for being a real architect. I don't want to be fined for being a real thinker. I don't want to be fined for being a real anything. In other words, he's saying, I'm going to be punished for doing the firsthand thinking and creating new and interesting architecture. I'm going to do what the market demands, and what the market demands is the lowest common denominator. And this idea of democracy as a herd. And he talks later about how it takes brains to govern and guide and foresee. So he says, give me an autocrat, give me a man, a real man, a man big enough and strong enough and willful enough to guide and to govern. The herd doesn't want to think, they have no vision. Give me a strong hand, an iron will, a keen intelligence, and the higher sense of humanity, which can care for the herd and protect the herd, etc. So this is, and you can see this is the root. He's sort of giving voice to what at the time was a common idea that would lead to authoritarian or totalitarian dictatorship later on. This idea, we need a strong, if democracy is the herd, if it's the lowest common denominator, then what we really need is a strong and powerful and we need a great genius to rise above and give orders and command to everybody and be an autocrat. And this was in the air for decades before people like Mussolini and Hitler and all these other people came along and said, oh, well, that's me. I'm the great genius who will lead the way. And of course, it didn't work out terribly well. Now, the question is, what's the answer to this? So you have the idea that democracy as the herd, as conformity, as the lowest common denominator on the one hand, and then the idea of, yes, we need a great man, and we need that great man to be an autocrat and to be a dictator and give orders to everybody on the other. What's the solution to that sort of false alternative that we're being given? And so again, having in mind that this is something that Ayn Rand was reading at the time that she was working in the Fountainhead, I think she and Sullivan offer essentially the same answer, which is a vision of democracy. Now, Ayn Rand didn't use this term democracy, but the thing that they're defending, a free society, not as being the mass and the conformity and the lowest common denominator, but as being individualism as the answer. Because this idea of the great individual, worshiping the great individual as the autocrat and the leader, when the great individual comes along and installs himself as the autocrat and the leader under fascism, he does it not in the name of individualist philosophy, not under the name of the great individual, but those philosophies were very outwardly collectivist. It was about conformity to the will of the nation, and the great leader was there to represent the will of the nation as a whole. The term fascism literally comes from it's an ancient Roman symbol of a bundle of sticks bound together, and the idea, this is supposed to symbolize the Roman state, because the idea that one stick individually is weak and you can snap it, but you bundle a bunch of sticks together in a fasci, and they become so strong that you can't break them. And this is the sort of symbol for the power of the state, the power of people acting together as a collective. And this is what the fascists took as the basis for the name of their movement. So it was very explicitly a collectivist movement. So the funny thing is, it's sort of like you have, well, as Ayn Rand would give Ellsworth Toohey the words, he said you have this pincer movement where you offer poison as food and poison as antidote. And so you had this, this very commonplace view expressed here by the student that it's, well, you have mass conformity in the lowest common denominator, which is democracy, or you have the great man, which is autocracy. But the great man theory turns out to be just another form of, conformity and the masses and the lowest common denominator. It's another form of collectivism. It's just two different variations on collectivism that are the alternatives. And the alternative that Ayn Rand offers, and the one that Sullivan gets to here, is the idea of reverence for the individual and the individual creator. So individualism is the answer to both of those things. So that's where we get back to in this chapter 19 on democracy, where he says, democracy is primarily of the individual. The democracy will begin to unfold itself to us as the expression of the individual. Insofar as the individual errs, democracy errs, and insofar as the individual grows and develops in the right, democracy gains thereby and grows and flourishes. And specifically, the moral principle or spiritual law of democracy, which he attributes to the Nazarene. Now, for people who don't know, the Nazarene is a reference to Jesus, because he's Jesus of Nazareth. So he's often referred to as the Nazarene, who he describes as the first Democrat, taught that the individual possessed his own soul. So this is the idea of Jesus as a forerunner of individualism, in this idea that he says everybody has their own individual soul, which is sacred, and therefore, the value of the Christianity as being something that affirms the value of the individual, and that's what he describes as being the basic spiritual idea behind democracy. And you can see how that's an answer then to this commonplace view of democracy versus autocracy that was a very common theme of the late 19th and early 20th century. Now, I don't think he doesn't really.
He gets into it more later.
Right. Again, Sherri keeps telling me. This is my frustration with Sullivan all along, is he tends to do this. Like, he indicates a little bit of his view on something, and then he drops it for a while, and you get 5 or 6 chapters later, he's going to tell you more. So I'm going to try to contain my frustration and be patient.
I keep telling him that
and wait to hear more about what he has to say about democracy later on.
He's laying out the seeds, and he's letting the student make the connection.
Okay.
Thank you very much, Rob. Really appreciate that. I mean, it's very interesting. I mean, in many ways, I always struggle with his take on politics, partly because what he's trying to do is in full line with the founding fathers. At the same time, he has some things that is more than founding fathers, and he has something which is less than founding fathers. So, for example, people like Madison have a very detailed grasp of what kinds of checks and balances you need to actually protect that sacredness of an individual soul. He's not that structural in that sense. So he's less in that way, but he's trying to, what he's trying to do is that he's trying to say, okay, given what is happening in the 19th century, how does these things, the spirit of it, how does it come, how does it express itself fully now? That's, I think, the problem he's trying to deal with. And he has this whole book called Democracy, A Man's Search, where he...
I'm just going to have to go get that book and read that, and then I'll be less frustrated.
Yes, please. Yes, please. I would recommend that, because he has there, that's all he talks about, Rob. So wonderful. Thank you, Rob. And thanks, Sherri. I really like the fact that the way you set this up, because it just kind of grounds it into, by actually showing people that that's okay. So now it's going to be Rupali, and then we will go to Maritza and Joia. Rupali.
Thank you, Shrikant. And so Rob and Sherri, I knew those were the two chapters you were going to discuss. Somehow I had that notion. So I'm going to go back to the letter. And actually, I'll share a personal story. So the children in India have been working with Dave for 4 months now without a break. And Dave was saying they need a break. And I was like, no, maybe we can do punctuation and grammar with them next. But today I got a letter from a note from my mother saying the children need a break and you need to give them a rest. And so since I got that letter, I just said, okay, here's a message. I really need to give them a break. But in this letter that the student writes to Louis Sullivan, he starts with Dear Uncle. And you can see the affinity growing between the student and the teacher. And often at school, we notice children will say mom to the teachers. Even if it's a male teacher, they'll call the teacher mom. And these are not just kindergarten students. These are even our 6th, 7th, 8th graders. But the reason they do that is because they see the connection, the caring, and it's almost like a parent and a child connection. It's that love between a student and a teacher, or a parent and a child, where the connection is they understand each other and they can talk to each other freely. So it's really interesting that he starts the letter with Dear Uncle. And the bond between a teacher and a student happens over time. It's through these, we've seen it's taken almost half a book for the student to kind of start forming that bond. But then he is also very, he's complaining. He says, I awoke the next morning after the storm, and I was grateful. I was grateful for the birds for their, I'll say this again. When I awoke the next morning after the storm, the birds were singing and you were gone. For both of which happenings, I was truly grateful. Grateful to the birds for their morning song, sounded chummy and bright. Glad to be rid of you because you oppress me, weary me, and hold me too strictly to the lines. And you see this between, parents and children, students and teachers. Okay, I've had enough of you. I need a break. And Maria Montessori calls this the time for second period learning, where the child has to process, the student has to process this information. In this chapter, there's also a lot of introspection. So the student is learning to reflect and say, what is going on within me and outside. So where he is talking about, he says, I've not felt quite the same concerning things in general and myself in particular. So he is he's thinking. You can actually see in this that he is thinking. And okay, let me just play this. So he quotes from, he says, as William said, so he's referring to William Shakespeare from A Midsummer Night's Dream. And he says that lovers, the poet, there's no difference between a poet and a madman after all. Only one is a little more regulated than the other. So he's thinking about himself. He is writing poems furiously, and anything that comes his way, he's studying it. So this also shows that the student is paying attention to literature, to poetry, to works of art. And he ends the note saying, don't ask me where I got this reference from for another quote that he makes. But then, I wanted to kind of just talk a little bit about the comparison that Shakespeare makes between lovers, madmen, and poets. And in this particular scene, he's talking about, that lovers and madmen are going with passion for the illusion of love. And poets can I really like this portion where he says, and as imagination bodies forth the forms of things unknown, the poet's pen turns them into shapes and gives to airy nothing a local habitation and a name. So it's the architect has to turn things into things of beauty. And I wanted to say, Sherri does this wonderful thing on the articles on things of beauty. And so just looking and studying them, studying things around you can help people learn. So one of the things that the student starts to do is starts to observe. And he says, I have been trying to write poems. So he's, after the Shakespeare quote, he says, I've been trying it on since, which means I'm writing a poem. I made a little one to a weed the other day. I like weeds. They have so much style to them. And when I find where they've grown, that they've grown free, they seem most interesting and suggestive to me. I think of myself as a weed sometimes. The form follows the function so beautifully, as you would say. I don't know the names of any of them, being city bred. They wanted me to study botany when I was younger, but I wouldn't have it. And now I'm sorry. So, so he's talking about the study of botany. And one of the things that Maria Montessori talks about is taking students out in nature. And she talks about, imagination just doesn't have to be in literature, it's also in science. And what do you mean by that? Looking at just the shapes of leaves. So here students have gone and collected different specimens, different leaves from nature. They've gone out for a walk, they've collected seeds with textures on them, and they are studying. Now, often when, I think Shrikant, you had mentioned this before, that you always liked biology, and studying biology was not made very interesting.
Yeah, I mean, for the longest time, I hated biology when I was in school. But as soon as I started looking at it outside of school, I because then it was about life.
Right. And so that's the thing. So if you're just teaching from the textbook, the children have absolutely no idea. But when they go, they touch, they feel, they use their senses, they come back, then they can lay them out and organize the materials. So here are students, doing just normal things. They plant tulips every year, and when the tulips bloom, they measure them, they study them, they see what was the day the first bloom appeared. And so they're learning to collect data with it. Oh, sorry about that. Let me stop share for a minute. So on the right, we have the student. He has officially declared, in the classroom, they all have jobs to do. And one of the jobs is to take care of the plants. And he's officially declared himself to be the gardener of the classroom. And so this week is our spring break. And before he left yesterday, he gathered all the plants from the classroom and he said, I'm going to water them. Oh, they're so dry, or there's dust on them. And there he is, no one, not a single teacher had to tell him about it. But he went on his own and collected all these plants. So I'm going to play a video because Now he's just doing his job of watering the plants and collecting them, taking care of them. And as he's doing that, he's just making mental notes or just talking to his friends around there. I did ask him to take his mask off at this point, but they're typically wearing masks all the time.
I observed that the leaves on bamboo are like oval shaped and they have like a tip on the top, because eventually they would grow into bamboo by wrapping it on the little stem that they're attached to. And that bamboo grows from rocky and dirt, like rocks and dirt places, and with leaves, like a ton of water. And once they get dusty, you should clean them. And if you get spider webs on them, you should spider webs on it. Spiders might eat, and that isn't good for the bamboo.
So in this case, he's just doing his job, but by doing his job, he is, learning everything about the bamboo, which he's not looking at a textbook. It just happens to be in the library. He took care of it. It was dusty. He got a paper napkin with water and cleaned all the leaves. And while cleaning the leaves, he could see how they were attached to the stem. And then he said, oh, they're growing in like there's no soil, like the other plants have soil, but it has rocks. Oh, okay, so the bamboo likes rocky area. And so he's making these connections by just observing. And so the other thing he noticed, and I didn't get all of it on tape, he said, oh, these plants are tropical plants and look how they collect water in them when I water them. So again, you can see that, the children begin to notice how the form follows function. And
I observed that.
And so here are other students in the fall. Our science teacher takes them out to collect leaves. They collect leaves, bring them back, and categorize them and organize. So now they can start seeing, the wonderful diversity in nature that the student in this chapter is talking about. And he says, it's one thing to feel, another undertaking to create, and you can't create if you don't feel. I wouldn't have found anything in a book that you would tell just how I felt towards that butterfly. It might tell how the other fellow felt towards something else, but that wouldn't do me any good. I'm going to express fully and intelligently what I feel. So by giving, by having the opportunity to touch, feel, sense things, students can then start thinking for themselves. And that's leading to the idea of democracy, the idea of the individual. But it's a journey. It is not something that you can learn. Now, here is a collage of sculptures that students have made. So they studied Asia, and each child took a plant and an animal to study in depth. And so although these students haven't been to Asia, they can really imagine because they've gone out and about and seen things around them. And they've created these models with paper, cardboard, clay of animals in their habitats. And so but one of the things that the student says in the following chapter in Awakening, he says, let me do it by myself. And I have to find it. Okay. There's a part in here which I can't quite find right now, but he says, I have to think for myself. I have to do it for myself. And one of the things in Montessori education, you see that the children are involved in the doing, which is what makes them, what makes learning really stick. So in the next chapter, the Awakening, Louis Sullivan is talking about the student who has now discovered nature, who has discovered how nature works, and the student is seeing that he's part of nature, and he is telling the student that, okay, earlier in the book, he had said to the student, thus shall you grow and put forth branch and bud. The fragrance of your blooming shall be my reward, and the fruit therefore shall be yours. And you can see that now happening in the awakening, where the student has arrived at his own conclusions through experiences that have guided him in the past few chapters. He's slowly developing clarity. He says, I have so many things to tell you that I hardly know where to begin. My thoughts have become lively and almost robust. So he is now thinking with clarity. And one of the things that Louis Sullivan says is that, okay, it's wonderful that you were in the country and you learned all these things, but that's not true with everybody. He says, I know a great many people who are simply bored in the country and they've lost their spontaneity to feeling, the capacity to for simple pleasures and to discern beautiful when it's right before their eyes. Nature suggests, for some people, nature suggests nothing, signifies nothing, and is nothing. And so for a person to be able to have sympathy, and we talked about this last time, it's important for them to understand how nature works. And he says, you may see nothing, in which case you're satisfied, or at once you go beneath the mere surface. You see so much that you're astonished. And then you see a little further, you become depressed. A little further, you become bewildered. A little further, you're frightened. A little further, you become passionately enamored. A little further, you become morbid. And I don't know what's happened. It's as far as I've gone. So he's making these discoveries. And at some point after, making these discoveries, he's asking, who am I? Where am I? So it's a discovery about himself. And then Louis Sullivan takes him back to the college building, and you can see the student is protesting about the building and doesn't want to care about it. And Louis Sullivan is saying, well, you must care about it. You should care about it. And then you see that, he is just, the student is rebelling. After that, the student is like, I've had enough of you. You cannot reason with me. I do not want to subject myself to your domination. And the student says, I quit. Do you understand me? I quit. And we see this quite often with students, especially when they're going through adolescence, that or in architecture, at least in our school, by third year of architecture, it's a 5-year course in India. By third year of architecture, students were ready to quit and find something meaningful. And the thing is that Louis Sullivan says in the chapter on democracy, he says, I'm not upset with you. You were molting. You will be all right again when your new feathers come. And this is our class pet. Her name is Rosie. She is a tarantula from South America. And one of our students brought it actually, a science teacher brought it for a science experiment, where a student did the experiment of, does the tarantula like to be touched? And so they started with the paintbrush, and with the soft paintbrush bristles, they would touch the tarantula for 10 strokes, and they would see, and initially the tarantula just ran away. And then eventually the tarantula got used to the students, so much so that she would love being held by the students. Well, then something happened. Last year she molted. And it was very scary to see 2 tarantulas side by side, because she had molted and her skin was next to. And so it is, I don't know if you've seen a snake skin that's a snake has molted and you see the whole snake skin. it is quite a revolting scene. It just gives you the heebie-jeebies. But then when you see what happens afterwards, there's a transformation. Now, transformation and change is difficult. It's not easy. And what happened with this particular tarantula, when she molted, she did not like to be touched. So whenever our students tried to touch her, she would just shrink, or she would then send out this sharp hair that would poke them. And so the students very quickly learned that she didn't want to be touched. So you can see that, in nature, and I was just amazed to see how much Louis Sullivan has studied nature and seen, change is hard. It's not easy. And humans, even if the student has arrived, the student is questioning again. The student is revolting again. You see this with adolescent children too. And then there is a transformation. And again, coming back to the teacher in the chapter on democracy. So, why does this happen? Why does, when we know that in nature we have things that are changing, we are changing, why do we resist change? But I think that's part of human nature that Louis Sullivan talks about. And then he says to the student, well, you have to face the change. And then Rob did a fantastic job of explaining what he means by democracy. I would just say that, both in Montessori and in Louis Sullivan's book, the emphasis on an individual is striking. And that it's unique to this education system where the individual child is respected and the individual child's spiritual being is nurtured throughout education. So with that, I will turn the microphone to Shrikant.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Rupali. All right, folks. So what we're going to do is we're going to do a few questions. Rob and Sherri need to leave in about 10 minutes. So I want to give a chance for people to ask questions. So if you have questions, go ahead and type exclamation mark. And after the Q&A, we'll continue with the presentations with Joia and Maritza, who will be joining us around that time. All right, so if you have questions, go ahead and type exclamation mark. I want to talk about a couple of things. One is that being able to deal with change. Immediately after this meetup at 5 o'clock, we're going to have Chet Richards back talking about OODA loop and how do you function in a fast changing environment, whether it is a business environment or a military environment or any environment. So don't miss that. And next Saturday, immediately after the Louis Sullivan meetup, we're going to have a meetup on child development and development of consciousness in a child based on Julian Jaynes' idea. Bill Rowe is going to be here, who has been working on that field of basically when is it that the child gets the idea of what is going on inside their head and be able to talk about that and have the idea that there is something going on in other person's head as being distinct from what they are seeing. So the idea of consciousness in a child, how does it develop? So it's going to be a very interesting topic. So, so folks, if you have questions, you can go ahead and type exclamation mark. Otherwise, I have plenty of questions. So firstly, on the democracy, Rob, I'm sorry, but Rohit had a very good suggestion. You can just skip to those chapters, it's okay. You can read another book.
Things going on.
Okay. All right.
I'll get the book on democracy.
Okay. All right. Let's see.
It's just that I've read it so many times and he's read parts and pieces. He's never read the whole thing all the way through. So he's kind of doing that for the first time. And so it's like right. When I gave him, what was it? 10 songs by one particular artist that I picked the top 10 best songs, and he listened to them and said, oh, these are great. Let's listen to everything else. And I said, no, the rest is garbage. So he's having that kind of reaction.
That was Mel Torme.
It was Mel Torme.
Okay. Wonderful. I mean, what happens for me is that when somebody like Louis Sullivan, I read all his works many times. So what happens is that you have like this, almost like a visual idea. So it's not sequential anymore. You kind of have, like a structure of his ideas, and you can go in at any point because you can always connect it back to anything else. So Joe hit exclamation mark by mistake. Okay, that's fine. That's fine. All right. So let's see where we are. Okay, I think we are at the stage where the student has finally learned that, look, there is something here. He has given up the layers that were stopping him from actually listening. And now he's listening, not just listening, he's beginning to move in that direction on his own, even though in a kind of a faltering way in the beginning, like a child learning to walk, but they're moving and they're walking a few steps. And that's what is the state of affairs right now. So let me take a moment here to put this book in the context of all other books of Louis Sullivan. So there is Autobiography of an Idea. So anybody who is finding this useful, I would recommend getting at least some of these books. So I'll give you specific recommendations. You should definitely get Autobiography of an Idea, because that actually is for many people, that's a better way of grasping these ideas. Because what it does is that it is telling you a story. I love the title, by the way, yeah. Autobiography of an Idea. And the idea is form follows function. And he is talking, it's an intellectual biography. It's an intellectual autobiography. So he's saying, okay, how did I learn this? Let me show you how I learned. And he has this incredible memory. So it's like, I think when he was 2, he remembers being next to his grandfather, looking up at the sky and noticing that there are clouds passing by the moon. So he says, the grandfather says, clouds are moving. And he says, no, the moon is moving. And he was very stubborn about it. He said, no, I can see it. And then suddenly his focus changes. And then he announces to the grandfather, no, you were wrong. It's the clouds that are moving. So, but you can see this authentic mind, independent mind at work very early. And he's talking about all his influences. I was particularly taken by his interaction with his teachers, his teacher in France, or who basically taught him how to think. So it's an incredible book. So I would definitely recommend that one. Then there is a rare book, which Sherri keeps on demanding that I bring to Charlottesville every time, but it's a rare book.
And hasn't brought it.
Yeah, it's called A System of Architectural Ornament. That is my favorite of the books, because he illustrates all these ideas. It's the same ideas, by the way, in Kindergarten Chats, or in Autobiography of an Idea, or the System of Architectural Ornament, or the Democracy of Man Search. It's the same ideas. But this one approaches it visually. And that's incredible, because you can actually see how he designs things. And then Democracy of Man Search is his social commentary. So he goes deep into the nature of society, talking about, so whatever you see in previews here in Kindergarten Chats is very, very well developed in that. And so all these 4 books put together give you a very good, good idea of the structure of his thought. So that's what I would explain. So firstly, I'm going to give a chance for Rupali, Rob, or Sherri to put any question on the table. for anybody.
Do you wanted to mention that
No,
autobiography?
no, it does not need flag.
Okay. I don't have a question. I just would like to mention where we are in the chapters. Another little signposting here. We just, 2 weeks ago, we finished with the Summer the Storm, that chapter where he took his first trip out. Our next group of chapters, it starts with Man's Powers. That's where we're starting. We have this issue where he mentions it early on. And Joia talked about his idea of man's powers. And I'm sure we're going to get into that in a great deal. But we also have a couple of interesting things. We've got our city and another city. So he's comparing one to the other. And then we have our Autumn Glory coming up. Now that's the second trip out to the country, out to the wilderness. And you can see, knowing that these 4 trips happen for the student, having that in your mind, notice the difference of what happens on the second trip. It's quite interesting. I don't, which chapters are we going to go? Are we going to go to?
We're going to start with Man's Powers,
and
and
then end with Autumn Glory.
Let's end with Autumn Glory. How many pages is that?
Let's see. Man's Power starts on 101.
Right. Welcome, Joia.
So it would be 20 pages. 19, 18, 19, 20 pages.
Okay, perfect. So that's what.
Can you hear us? Oh, sorry.
Yes.
Sorry, I got Chris here and Ash. Maritza's getting her phone, and we're showing you here our Louis Sullivan stair rail here.
Yay.
Wonderful.
Let's come get this other view.
Yeah, here it goes.
Wow.
Get the far away view.
Oh wait, come get the far away view here. Wait, can you see the?
Well, that's Tiffany your show. Oh wait.
No, because I'm behind.
Oh,
Where
can you? Oh,
am
see.
I? You can't really see it here too well, can you?
Well,
I can see the staircase.
Yeah, the staircase is actually closed, but that's as close as we can get. But we're gonna walk outside. We finished our trip here at the Met, but we wanted to say hi to you and
Okay,
show
wonderful.
you Louis Sullivan.
Wonderful. We'll see
So
you.
let Sherri keep going.
Okay, wonderful. All right, excellent. So they will be joining us for their presentations in about 2-3 minutes. Once they're outside, they are actually doing a tour of the Met. I couldn't be there because I want to do these meetups, and I'm still not got my second shot. I'm getting it tomorrow when I'll be all ready to go. But just to say something about the Met. I'm a big fan of the Met. So anytime you are in New York, you should definitely. I'll talk about the Met once these guys are outside, because I want to hear their take on the Met too. But Joe, you had a question. This time for real. Go ahead.
Yeah, this time for real is that, and I'm just skimming the book, but I know that sociology is like a huge impact, like in Sullivan's development. And I was just wondering if you could comment on that specifically and how that relates to democracy in his thoughts, essentially, with architecture.
You're on mute.
There you go.
Yeah, I don't know if I'd know anything about that very much. I haven't read as much of Sullivan's biography, and I don't see the ideas of sociologists of the era that I'm familiar with popping up here, but maybe Shrikant could say more about that.
Yeah, I mean, his take is very much an individualistic take. He's saying for an individual to be kind of fully actuated individual using all these powers, how does the society need to be? And again, he's finding that everything around, all the social systems around him are actually destructive to such an individual. So he's questioning things like, what are these schools? What are these religious institutions? What are these businesses? What are they doing? And so that's where it's coming from. So the thing that I find most valuable is raising of those questions, kind of like in the Outwitting the Devil, where there is a very deep questioning of social institutions, and he's asking all the right questions. He may not have the full solutions. It is at the beginning stage. Realize that this is the 19th century where society is changing dramatically. And it's a very, very tough question at that point, but he's raising the right questions. Go ahead, Sherri.
The other thing to keep in mind here is architecture and sociology have always been somewhat linked. The relationship between that changes throughout history, but I think it was one of the quotes attributed to Winston Churchill, that we shape our building, man shapes their buildings, and then thereafter the buildings shape man. And so there is that link always there. And it's especially the case in the 19th century where they're starting to really realize that different things that you do in architecture that you build can have a massive impact on the people who live and work within them. Some of that was more technical at the time, technological as well. So they were realizing things like the need for fresh air and fresh light, and realizing that it's the architect's responsibility to make sure that you're creating a livable, workable environment for people. This is the Industrial Revolution is taking place. And there's a lot of capacity to improve or drastically decrease the quality of life based on a building and how it's laid out. So that's where some of that's coming to. That continues that idea that there's a link between the social structure and architecture, sometimes it gets to the point in architecture where architects believe it's their responsibility that architecture totally shapes the society, and then sometimes it ebbs and flows back and forth between the two. But that's where some of that's just coming from that kind of, it's part of the ground.
Yeah, and this the great thing is that he also thinks of all social structures, the social systems like that. He's saying you shape the social systems and the social systems shape you. Classic example of schools. Based on what you think a child is, you shape the school. And then the school actually shapes the child. And so there is this feedback loop. And what he's just like he is very particular about architecture and see what it is doing to human beings, he's equally particular about the social structures. Mm-hmm. And that's what he talks about when he talks about sociology or democracy. That's what he's referring to.
So it's not so different than McLuhan's kind of ideas.
The idea is the same, that
Okay.
There is this feedback loop between, McLuhan would put it that man shapes his tools and tools shape man. Tools in turn shape man. So his thing would be functions create the forms and the forms shape the functions. There is the impact of the forms on the functions. So it's the same kind of idea. And each of them, the scope in which they apply it, like the scope in which Louis Sullivan applies it is humongous. He applies it to everything. McLuhan applies it to many, many, many things and many current things. The thing that is common between both of them is that both of them are really focused on the present. They're focused on the present in a way, because like McLuhan's point is that most people are living in the rear view mirror. They are actually responding and thinking about what has happened in the past. And like his son, Eric, was always used to complain whenever anybody said that, Marshall McLuhan is thinking about the future. He's aware of the future. He says, no, he's aware of the present because this is already here. right? Marshall McLuhan was talking about what is actually happening here. The same thing is true with Louis Sullivan. And that's what makes them very odd people in their own times. But seem like really profound seers at time after that, because they're saying, I look at Marshall McLuhan's videos and they say, is he talking about the internet in the 1960s? That's what he's describing. But it's the same thing with people being able to see. Next up is Jyoti. Let me just check up with Maritza and Joia. So Maritza and Joia, are you out? You need a few more minutes?
We need a few more minutes. We're going to the park so Maritza can have a tree.
Or take your time and go ahead and send me a message in Zoom so I know when you guys are ready. It's wonderful to see you guys out inside the Met. And hi, Maritza, welcome to New York, the center of the universe. Everybody comes here. It's a gravity which pulls everybody here. I'm glad you're here. Excellent. Jyoti, your question.
Yeah, my question is, part of it is you explained through Joe's question, but part of it is, I'm going to bring the genetics in it. There are a lot of people, when they're knocked out by the sufferings of the life, then they start gravitating towards the nature. They are searching their soul, and nature plays a big role in soothing their soul, to put it that way. And there are some peoples who had a fascination for nature even when they were very little, with or without the exposure to nature. I was wondering if any DNA has to do with that, or nature can just be totally environmental and sociological. I always wondered that. There are, in my family, all my siblings were prone to like the nature. And I know we had a house in the countryside, and I chased the butterflies, and all that did help in reinforcing my passion for nature. But then my husband's family, they were not into it. They were all, very logical engineers and talking all the time, too much logic, too much sense. So I was wondering if that has anything to do with the genes.
Robin, Sherri, does anybody want to comment?
Well, I was pausing here because I thought for sure that Rupali would have something to say on the importance of education in children in nature. She's going to know the exact facts of it.
I was just going to say, I'm not speaking as an expert on DNA or anything like that. I would just say from my experience as an educator that the environment shapes a person. And Maria Montessori talks really a lot about the impact of the environment. And we see that, the more experiences that a person has with interacting with the natural environment, whether they are out and about in the farms, or they are, you take children out for long hikes, or you're outside in your own backyard looking at things that are fascinating. I mean, everybody has something around them that they can look at and learn from. So it's also as Louis Sullivan says in this book, there are many people in the country who are not fascinated by things that the student was fascinated by, because the nature means nothing to them and they're satisfied with that. So it's really how in tune or how sharpened your faculties are for receiving, for observing and for learning from nature. That's what I feel. I don't necessarily feel it is genetics. I think it is mostly how tuned or how observant we are about nature, and making those connections between nature and life and human life.
And I would just add that, we are all part of nature, even if we are city dwellers and living in high rises. it's still part. It's just the world that we formed. So it comes out, whether in whatever form we create it. I keep looking at this beautiful picture of the fjords in Tom's background, wishing that I could be there. But no, it's always a detriment, I think, when as city dweller as I have been in the past, I always wanted some element to it. But even if it was just a balcony to feel the fresh air, it's part of our world. It doesn't have to necessarily be the wild woods. It can be a potted plant, but it's still part of our world that we're in.
Another angle on the same thing is to look at, kind of think of it as like nature and culture, or figure and ground. So what Louis Sullivan is arguing for is that be aware of the ground, be aware of nature. It also includes, we are part, as human beings, we are part of nature. And there is a lot of stuff that is going on with your body itself or between people that is there as part of the ground. And most people are not aware of that. And a lot of potential lies in noticing those things, these slight mismatches. So in that sense, it is, what is in your focus versus what is around it. And what he's saying is that take in everything that is around it and then relentlessly focus on things to bring it into focus and go through this process. So there is a respect for reality that you need to have, where you say, whatever is in my consciousness is not all that there is. Reality, or even myself, is much more than what is there in my consciousness. So take that in. At the same time, consciousness is important. That is how you actually get things done. So try to make as much of that conscious. Initially, it will be in poetic forms, metaphorical forms, visual art forms. So you might have to start with that. And he derives, so that's, I think that's what it is about. It's a epistemological issue of difference between kind of figure and ground. All right. So that's where we are. And we are going to get a very good illustration, I think, because both Joia and Maritza are going to be out in Central Park. Ash are going to be out in Central Park and giving their presentation from there.
Under the redbuds, I think, right?
Yes. So I want to take this opportunity to recommend the Met to anybody, because there is something about having massive quantity of art in one place where you can go and navigate through all of it. Sherri, why are you laughing?
It's got to be a little at a time.
No. Little. The thing is that little is always there in big. It's like, even if you can always go and look at one painting. It doesn't take away from the fact that there can be big things. So I'm a very big fan. I have a certain method of going through the museums, which Sherri is horrified at. I walk through the entire. Rob also agrees?
Yeah, which is a problem whenever we go on vacation to museums.
Must see everything
as much as
possible.
Yeah, exactly.
All day long.
Exactly. And beautiful. Yeah, and the beautiful thing about art is that it has emotional impact on you. So you can just walk by a painting and it'll tell you. You will know that, okay, this one I need to come back to. So I just walk through the entire Met, make notes, keep track of everything that's valuable, and then go back and spend time only on the things that are valuable. So that way, and I have a map for the future. So I usually, like when I came to New York first, I just got a yearly membership to the Met. So I could go and do my reading and everything in the Met. So that was just a very, very good background. So I noticed that Joia and Maritza have stopped moving. Does that mean that they
I'm
are?
here. I think Maritza's not back.
What's that?
But I'm here.
All right.
Do we have a bad echo on your end?
Yes,
Yeah.
we do.
All right, so we're having the world's most interesting Zoom conversation because there's 4 of us here, all in person, all logged on to the same Zoom call.
Excellent.
I think that
Excellent.
only happens in 2021.
Wonderful. So this is our first, folks.
hear from
This
anyone.
is our
I don't hear.
first hybrid Zoom meetup.
Oh, no, but we need to, I can't
I'm
hear
gonna
it now.
mute you
Okay.
for a second. This is our first test of a hybrid Zoom meetup. Okay. I expect to have many of these. I want to be able to, I'm going to restart our Saturday meetups in New York, in-person meetups at some point. And when we do, we will do Zoom. So people can join us from anywhere. I have a system already worked out for doing breakout rooms. So there will be breakout rooms in person, breakout rooms outside going on. If Joe and Maritza are organizing something amazing in person in Philadelphia, maybe we can do we can tag on the online Zoom to that so other people can enjoy whatever is going on over there. So this is our first experiment. So let's begin. So Maritza and Joia, which of you would like to go next? You need to unmute.
I should probably go downstairs.
I'm going to go first, but they're going to put their volume down.
Yes.
So we're experimenting where we have it with stereo sound because Ash here has his volume on and Chris has his, and then we can all hear, but then they got to put it down so each one of us can talk.
Here, I'm gonna
Sounds
put
good.
my-
It's the sound is good.
Yeah, because you'll hear what hopefully you can hear me from 2 feet away.
Exactly.
So I just have a really short presentation today anyway. I think everybody knows that I like to follow the story of where we are. And we really are at a kind of midpoint here in the story. And maybe even probably Sherri and Rupali talked about this, how we had this really great climactic moment with the student who really had that experience out in the country. Now he's come back and there's sort of what Louis Sullivan even describes as the counterpoint. I love how he uses the musical metaphor to describe what he's doing with the plot. That he describes this as the counterpoint where the student is going to have that moment of revulsion. And now we're going to kind of go back on an upswing.
Joia, let me interrupt
more
for a
about
second.
democracy, but we haven't even yet hit that climax. We're building up to it the next time. But there's really
Joia, let me interrupt for a second. Can you make sure that your phone does not move too much? Can you put it somewhere or have somebody else hold it?
Okay, can one of you hold this for me? Okay, Ash is trying to hold it for me. Is
Okay,
that better?
Ash is a much better phone stand than you are.
Okay, Ash
Thanks,
makes a good
Ash.
tripod, I guess.
Go ahead.
So I just,
Just start shaking when you laugh.
if I laugh too hard, the branch shakes. So it doesn't work so well. But I just have a really short presentation anyway, because I wanted to talk about one passage from the Awakening chapter where he talks about the importance of experience. And he says, experience teaches. And that was definitely what we did today. We had an experience going to the Met. And these guys will tell you I was the taskmaster. I made sure we stayed on schedule, but we did a lot. We started in Egypt. We went from Egypt upstairs to Asia. From Asia, we went across to ancient Greece and ancient Rome. We snuck through Africa to get into the modern section so we could see Ayn Rand's favorite painting in the whole world, the Dali crucifixion. We had to kind of shield our eyes by the Jackson Pollock to leave there. We went to the I don't even know what they call that hallway with the Rodin sculptures, which are amazing. We saw some European, we stopped to see the Monet, the Impressionist paintings and the Vincent van Gogh there. We went up to see David and Socrates. And we then went through the room with all the musical instruments. And then we did make it to the American wing and we saw all of the gorgeous Tiffany stained glass that I love. And we saw the Frank Lloyd Wright room. And of course we saw Louis Sullivan. So we've definitely had experience teach us today. And I think Louis Sullivan is right. And I love the point he makes where he says that sometimes people think it's just negative experience that teaches, but the importance of it's the positive experiences that are here to teach us and that we are meant to be happy. And that was our day today. So I'll turn it over to Maritza now.
Wait a minute. I want to say,
Maritza, or do you have your own phone, Maritza?
just a second.
Okay.
So I want to say that this is actually like the letter in the book. So now you're doing a field trip and you're going to give a report from the field trip. So wonderful. Maritza.
Hi guys. So I brought the sure. All right. I get a phone holder as well. I brought Louis Sullivan with me to the map. So I only read through to the end of Democracy. I wasn't quite sure where. Oh yeah, I can see you guys. Awesome. So a couple things that stood out to me here are I like the way that the senior architect, kind of calms down the very frantic student who's having troubles with all these emotions. And so I'm gonna read a couple things that I highlighted from the book here. So looking at, when the student is freaking out, he asks a whole bunch of stuff, and he has this little word vomit, right? And in his word vomit, the very small phrase that I highlighted was a reality of the spirit. Because he has all this word vomit, and at the very end of this thing, it's on page 90, he says, was it too a metaphor, an allegory, or was it like my butterfly, my psyche, a reality of the spirit? And Sullivan tells him, but I did not make the storm. And the thing about that hits me is that this kid seems to be encountering himself for the first time, and it sits very uneasy in his skin. And he's like, totally flying off the wall. But I really love some of the responses that Sullivan has for the student. I think they're so great. And he says, the child is like, well, because he comes off as a child. I will say that his really long rants are so childish. I'm like, oh my gosh, sit down, little boy, sit down. That's the way I feel. And but he says, but these things, these feelings are new to me. And Sullivan says to him, they are not new to you. You were born that way. These activities of the mind and heart have merely been lying dormant. They were what I call suppressed functions. Now they are awakening again into life, and they bring a certain pain and fever with them. Your morbidity is but the shadow of a bird of passage. The fascinating thing about this here is we talked about form, we talked about function, and now we know that there's such a thing as suppressed function. And the neat thing about that is I feel like that's a very hopeful thing to consider. The fact that when you're exploring new territory, the unknown is really scary, but the unknown is that only way to enter into chrysalis, right? So we can become cocoons. The student keeps talking about a butterfly, but in my mind, what came to me is he doesn't realize that before you can be a butterfly, you must be a caterpillar. You must enter the cocoon. And what, I don't think it was here, I think it was in maybe in Peterson, Jordan Peterson wrote about how, as a child, somebody takes out the butterfly from the cocoon and it fails to form its beautiful wings because there is some kind of fluid or enzyme in the one portion of the butterfly before it comes out of the cocoon that only spreads towards the wings to give them the life and the power through the struggle of exploding out of that cocoon. And that's what I'm seeing happening here. That's what the student is going through, and that's amazing. And I see a lot of hope there. It's really great. And I feel like we go through that, and I have a whole bunch of stuff highlighted here, but that's like the general gist of it. And then the chapter on democracy is like, I feel like it's also the response. It's a response to the students awakening, because I feel like the teacher is now saying, you're ready for more. Let me give you more. I understand that you're not done digestion, but that's okay, because the very fact that you've digested what you have thus far means that you can handle more. And that's really kind of fascinating. And the important pieces of democracy. And by the way, in earlier chapters, I know a couple other folks here have wondered along with me, what exactly is he talking about when he says democracy? Because it doesn't seem that his idea of democracy quite jives with that which we're most accustomed to in today's modern world. And so we're right. He explains it in this chapter, and he tells us, and one of my favorite was, there's so many things here, he says, we live and we learn so little. We have eyes and see so little, ears and scarcely hear. And he says, insofar as the individual errs, democracy errs. And insofar as the individual grows and develops in the right, so democracy gains thereby and grows and flourishes. Democracy is primarily of the individual. And he also tells us democracy is a moral principle, a spiritual law, a perennial subjective reality in the realm of man's spirit. So again, I'm hearing like this is a pattern I see repeating in my life now. So everything that I'm reading and studying, the path forward lies within us. We have to start within, and that's the only way to spread it outward. So that's what I hear him saying to us, and that's what I'm leaving you guys with. And we're sitting on a tree in Central Park, and it's amazing.
Springtime, and it's beautiful.
It is just gorgeous out here. The sun even came out, and so yeah, thank you guys.
Wonderful. I want to do one more thing here. Both Maritza and Ash are in my city. So firstly, I want to welcome you to my city. Really appreciate you coming. Secondly, I also want to ask you about your impressions, both of you, on your impressions of the Met. Because this, I know that Joia or Chris, they are used to the Met. It's like our backyard. But for Maritza and Ash, this is your first time here. So how about I ask Ash first and then Maritza? What are your impressions about the Met? What did you get? What is this thing called Met, and what does it have to offer you or human beings? Ash.
Well, like you mentioned, Shrikant, it's just there's a massive quantity of amazingly incredible art here. And as Joia said, we took in a lot of it in a very short time. So my main feeling at the moment is a little bit of overwhelm. Honestly, I feel like I still need to kind of process and decompress a lot of it and go back through some of the photos I took of some of my favorite things I saw. But yeah, it's awe-inspiring. Even, some of the works that would not be my personal, I wouldn't decorate my house with this, but just the level of craftsmanship and detail that goes into the production of some of these things is itself awe-inspiring. So yeah,
What was your favorite? Is that the impossible question?
Yeah, I'd have to think about it for a minute. So maybe you can come back to me.
Sure, I'll come back to you. You can cheat and talk up to identify up to 3. Maritza. So I'm going to go to Maritza, and then I will also have Chris and Joia. I will ask them what are their favorites in the Met. So Maritza, what is your experience?
Yeah, I feel like that is an impossible question. What is your favorite? But it really is. It's so much art. It's overwhelming. I'm convinced that I've not yet processed everything that we saw. And for me, Shrikant, one of the surprising pleasures was seeing the things that the people with whom I walked stopped for. That was really, because we're all a little different, and the things that, because there are things that you're walking by, like we go flying by, and everyone would fly by something, and then you see them backtracking, and then you want to stop and see what makes them stop. And that was just an absolute delight for me. It really was.
Maritza made us stop every time there was a beautiful blue color.
Well, not every time. In my defense,
beautiful.
The bright blue of the that was the Enlightenment. Was that the Enlightenment era? no, what was it? What
That was in
era?
the Renaissance era.
The Renaissance era. When we're going through those, there's so much Baroque and browns and reds, and it's very vivid. And then I noticed that every other painting had this like shock of blue toga, and it was just striking. I had to stop. My favorite was this super ornate, like Asian design, like a chest, a giant chest. It was a wardrobe made in Mexico, and it was in the Asian area of the Met. And we're like, one of them's like not like the rest of them. And it was the only piece that's not behind glass. It was made of wood, and the inscription said that it was actually made using Asian, Japanese influence. And so that was interesting to me because I had no idea that there was trade commerce between Asia and Mexico. So, I mean, because it was, I don't remember the time frame, 18th century. That's a really long time ago. Thanks. But it was very impressive, and it was beautiful. And I didn't know that there was any Spanish influence to it at all. And it did catch my eye, and it was like in the Asian place. So imagine my shock when I go to read it and it says Mexico. Like, I think I actually had Ash come over and read it because I was like, am I reading that right? Did it say Mexico? And he's like, yeah, what's he doing there? So that one was kind of my my favorite surprise to see there. Thanks, guys.
Wonderful. Wonderful. Chris, what about you? What are your favorites in the Met? And then Joia, and then we'll come back to Ash.
Yeah, sure. So my favorite piece is, and it has been for many years, it's a sculpture of Rodin's that's actually situated right in the center of the hallway of the Rodin section it's called The Age of Bronze. And it's the figure, Maritza's asking me a question. What's that?
Tell him that we decided that's what the student looks like.
Oh, yeah. So it's called The Age of Bronze. It's a figure of a probably early 20s man, just kind of standing in kind of relaxed repose, but also contemplative and proud and ecstatic and exultant. Those are all the emotions that I feel when I see it. I just think it's a great image of kind of a man coming into his own and kind of feeling his powers. And not all of Rodin's sculpture I even like, because sometimes I find it a little too abstract and even drippy, but this is a very kind of realistic impression. So it just feels like in the presence of a person. And having these three here with me today to experience it, they all kind of grafted onto it in a really lovely and inspiring way that we said it was the student, Louis Sullivan student, kind of emerging into enlightenment and understanding. So that was a nice addition, kind of little flair to add to my interpretation of it.
Wonderful, thank you. Thanks, Chris. Joia, what about you? What's your favorite?
Sorry. Wait, Ash, you want to hold it for me again? My phone is dying because I can Chris my charger, but it's all there.
Oh wait, you know what?
You need to.
Thank you. Okay. I had two favorites that I wanted to talk about because I actually found a new favorite, and I don't even know what that one was called, but it was this new Japanese work that was gorgeous. I'm going to call it The Wave, and it was made out of glass. Ash maybe can send a picture of it, and it was just when Ash was talking about craftsmanship, it was gorgeous. And to me, it was almost like two works of art in one, because the glass sculpture itself was gorgeous, this wave, and then the way it reflected, like created like a picture of light that was just stunning, absolutely beautiful. So that was a brand new work that I was so excited to see.
So it was actually called Free Essence 131.
Free Essence 131. Maybe Ash can make a sense of. We did take some good pictures. And then I guess I have a theme, because the other my perennial favorite is, I love the Tiffany stained glass, and I always say that I'm a kind of person who I prefer sculpture to painting. But what I love about stained glass, and especially in the hands of Tiffany, is that he takes light and color and makes it three-dimensional. So to me, I could just spend hours standing in front of those works of art.
Wonderful.
What are yours, Shrikant? You have to tell us your favorites.
No, I'm not there. So Ash.
Oh, do you want to? You want to choose this?
Okay, sure.
Go ahead.
So I really like the piece that Joia mentioned as well, and actually a lot of the stuff.
Oh, sorry.
So a lot of the stuff in the Asian,
Mhm.
just the elegance and simplicity of it, but that they capture so much power in some of those works. It's really amazing.
Your sound is very, yeah.
He needs to wear that. Yes. So.
Okay. Can you hear me now?
Yeah. Go ahead.
Okay. So I really like the same piece that Joia mentioned, as well as a lot of the other things in the Asian wings, the elegance and simplicity, but the power.
No, your sound is very
You know
faint.
what? Put both of them in, because I think when
They're dying.
Yeah. No.
Is that better?
Yeah, much better. Go ahead.
Okay, great. So I really enjoyed a lot of the pieces in the Asian wing, including the one Joia mentioned, just because the power and simplicity and elegance of them. But also, so I still don't know if I can pick a single favorite. I mean, like there was one room where just in the single room there was the death of Socrates. There was the statue of Cupid and Psyche. Who did that one?
That was in the European.
Yeah, but who was the artist for that one?
Oh, I don't.
And there's other David portrait of Lavoisier and his wife that drives you crazy.
I hate that painting. Hate. I go see that painting just to point out how much I hate that lady in that painting. That's good.
But and I love, you know, Houdon's portrait bust of Benjamin Franklin we saw here. So yeah, I don't know if I can pick a single favorite. It's just, yeah, kind of the whole experience. I'm just taking it all in. So
Wonderful. Ash, I hate to tell you, but New York is like that. New York is full of great stuff like that. And everybody gets overwhelmed, but that's good thing. That's a good thing. All right, folks. So thank you. Thank you so much.
Wrapping up.
All right. Thank you so much. Really appreciate that. Joia and Maritza, glad that you could do your presentations. And I'm glad that we've tested out this concept of hybrid. So I look forward to, you know, as we get out of this COVID, I look forward to keeping the Zoom going and adding the hybrid to the mix. All right. So last chance for questions. If anybody has questions or comments, any comments or questions, anybody, you can go ahead and type exclamation mark. Rupali, do you have any comments on this, on the Met or anything?
Oh my goodness, I love the Met. I would say that my first experience at the Met was with Shrikant and many years ago. And there are, you know, it's just a fantastic place to view some of the greatest works in history. As I think Joia gave a tour of the historical perspectives, right, from one period to another. And when Louis Sullivan, early in the book, he talks about sociology, talking about what Joe mentioned before, that you can see the human development through art, through various pieces of art, and how people's outlook, they've changed throughout history. And we've talked about, you know, how the social structure is reflected in art, and the art reflects the social structure of a civilization. You can see that at the Met. And then I would say, you know, the portraits at the Met are wonderful too. So it is a lot and it is overwhelming, but to get that grand scheme is always a great thing at the Met. So wonderful to see everybody enjoying the day out. It looks really pretty and wonderful.
Yeah, I mean, I disagree with you folks that it is overwhelming and too much. I think it is too little. I think, you know, the way I see it is that I see it all in parallel. Like when I go to Louvre, for example, I'll get like a 7-day pass so that every day I can go spend time there. And Rupali, the point that you're making, I think that's very big. This is an opportunity because it is such a large quantity of art over such a large period of time. It actually shows you kind of the psychoepistemology or the view, the worldview of people and how they change over time. Because art is a very powerful way of showing you what a person, the artist, considers important. And you can go through, Middle Ages, you can go through like Greek, Roman, then you can go to the Middle Ages, then you can go to the Renaissance, you can go to, the Enlightenment time, you can go to the 19th century, you can go to the 20th century, you can look at, what is happening in the Scandinavian art, what is happening in the Italian art during the same time, and you are able to actually physically see the difference in all these different minds and attitudes and worldviews. And you can do that like that very, very quickly. So it's a, crucial resource for, it's wonderful to have it here. But I would like to have Louvre right next door, and maybe a few more galleries. I like the British gallery of portraits and stuff. So it would be nice to have all of it accessible. I think Louvre has made all its collections available online. And I hope everybody else does that too. So we can have, of course, it's not a substitute for actually seeing them in person, but it's very special. Dave, what's your question?
Well, it seems to me we're here in architecture class and no one has said anything about that building. I forgot the name of the architect, but that's a spiral. To me, it's a very striking building.
Which building are you talking about?
The Metropolitan Art Museum, is that what we're talking about?
Oh, I think
that's
you're thinking that would be the Guggenheim. Frank
Right.
Lloyd
I
Wright's
think,
Guggenheim.
Oh,
yeah, Dave
okay.
is talking about the Guggenheim.
5 points off, sorry.
That's okay. But Guggenheim is an amazing building.
Although the Met is an interesting case study. We were talking about that today, in fact, because it was designed by McKim, Mead, and White, who were the leading neoclassical architects of the time. And it's probably, Louis Sullivan probably would not have liked that design because it borrows heavily from classical motifs. It's heavy Corinthian and composite columns all throughout. I mean, it's grand spaces, but it definitely evokes kind of a historical backward-looking view of what kind of an institutional building should be, as opposed to something of its time.
Yeah, Guggenheim is very interesting because Guggenheim, I really like the building and I almost always hate everything that they are showing there. There was one time where I found something that I could watch, and that was actually motorcycles. They had an exhibit on motorcycles, history of motorcycles. And the Guggenheim is constructed as a ramp. So any kind of chronological presentation, it is just perfect. So you're walking along the ramp and you can see how motorcycles developed over time, what it was like. But yeah, it's amazing building. All right, folks. So thank you so much. And thanks for Chris and Ash and Joia and Maritza for joining in. And we will see you. So folks, we're going to take a little break. We've got at 5 o'clock, we have an incredible meetup. Chet Richards is going to be here talking about his book, Certain to Win. He is the colleague of John Boyd. John Boyd himself worked on this book for about 10-15 years along with Chet. So don't miss that. I'm going to shut the meetup and I will open it back again at 5 o'clock. See you folks. Bye.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye.